Welcome, welcome. As I mentioned, I am Pastor Kelvin Sauls. I serve as the Director for Interfaith Communities here at Community Health Councils. And it is indeed a joy for me to welcome you to part 2 in this webinar series entitled Soulforce Alliance. The purpose of the Soulforce Alliance webinar series is to continue the critical and urgent work of analyzing the drivers of disparity, organizing for disruption, and mobilizing for the elimination of systems and structures that continue to paralyze individuals, families, communities here in South Central Los Angeles. Now, we did not start this in a vacuum. This work is built on the work of the South Los Angeles Building Healthy Communities Hub. That is a very, very important hub that was pulled together or that came together several years ago as part of commemorating the uprising that took place in 1992. And I know we all have different names for that disruption that took place. But it is really, based on the place-based research with over 30 community organizations and institutions and 125 resident leaders that launched South Central Rooted. This revelatory and liberatory work explore 4 intersecting root causes or drivers of disparity in South Central Los Angeles. And the important piece about the work is that this was done from a health equity lens. We believe that's a very important lens because this framework helps shed light on the systemic nature of inequality and the critical role that grassroots South Central leadership has played in creating change. South Central Rooted offers a blueprint to answer the question, what will it actually take to transform these conditions and ensure low-income communities of color ensure that they can thrive, in Los Angeles. So this webinar series will continue now to take a deep dive into these 4 drivers of disparity that have tangible, day-to-day consequences on people's abilities to lead fuller lives and participate meaningfully in their communities and in the broader democracy. Today, we're going to focus on what I call the driver, the persisting pandemic of structural displacement. So we're going to be dealing with, the moral and humanitarian crisis of homelessness, as well as gentrification that is taking place in our communities. And so, one final thing I'd like to say is the purpose of this series is to develop a curriculum rooted in liberation theology, sacred resistance, and moral reimagination towards interfaith movement building for a more inclusive, healthier, and equitable city and county of Los Angeles. So we're looking forward to continuing this series, and to continue to develop this resource for faith communities and grassroots social justice organizations right here in South Central Los Angeles, as well as the broader city and county of Los Angeles. And today, we have some exciting guests and thought partners, not just thought partners, but folk who are on the front lines, of doing this work, and just grateful that they've taken the time to come and share around, this particular driver of disparity, what I again called, the pandemic of displacement, and we know, what all of that is about, whether it is talking about the Trail of Tears, whether it is talking about the Middle Passage, whether it is talking about the Japanese internment camps, or whether it is talking about this new phenomena that's been going on of gentrification. Displacement has been a pandemic that's been an integral part of the very fabric, DNA of the United States of America. And so within that framework, I think it's important to understand that this is a moral crisis. This is a humanitarian crisis because that's what's been going on, whether it's redlining or whether it is trusting the invisible hand to facilitate, shelter. We know that the pandemic of displacement has been with us. We're going to start off, with Allyson Crosby from the Los Angeles Housing Services Authority, where I serve as a city commissioner, to just come and give us just a brief overview around the state of this moral and humanitarian crisis of homelessness or houselessness that we are dealing with in the city and the county of Los Angeles. And then I'll introduce our four panelists, and we're going to go deep on how to continue to analyze, while at the same time talking about, how we must continue to organize, for a thriving South Central Los Angeles and city and county. Allyson, thanks for being here. And we invite you now to share what you've prepared for us, just to give us a sense of what we're dealing with around, the crisis of homelessness.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Commissioner Sauls. I first want to say it's a privilege to be able to come and speak in these spaces, because I feel thankful that I was introduced to the work, and would say that I was radicalized into the work through the tradition of the Catholic worker movement in Santa Ana, Orange County, as well as in Los Angeles and the Boyle Heights neighborhood. And so I'll be taking a brief moment of time with you all today to talk about the current state of homelessness within the city of Los Angeles, and also within the county of Los Angeles. The information that I'll be referencing today comes directly from the 2020 point in time homeless count. And so due to the pandemic, we were not able to do one for 2021, but at least can give us a general overview of the recent state of homelessness within our area. So we'll do a quick overview of region, or what's happening per region. Also a quick oversight of demographic breakouts, and then just some information about the homeless count that's coming up for 2022. So if we look regionally from the homeless count of 2020, overall, there was an increase in the state of homelessness within the Southern California region. So Los Angeles as a county is not alone in the experience of displacement for folks and housing instability. And so as you can see here, from 2020, there was a 12% increase in the experience of homelessness for folks or people experiencing homelessness within Los Angeles County. And in terms of the numbers breakout between the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles, we did see an increase from 2019 to 2020, where there was an increase of 13% within the county of Los Angeles, and then also an increase of 16% within the city of Los Angeles. So unfortunately, we are still continuing to see an upward trend in displacement for folks across our region. Here we have a quick overview in what sheltered and unsheltered homelessness looked like from 2019 to 2020. A small piece of success to be able to celebrate is that we have had an increase in shelter beds that are available for individuals who are struggling with housing stability. So we did see an increase in folks that are able to access shelter beds and are in care. But overall, we still saw an increase in the overall number of folks experiencing homelessness. Here we have a regional breakout of the census of individuals who are experiencing homelessness across the county. You'll see here that there's an acronym being used that's pronounced SPA, which stands for Service Planning Area. You'll see 8 different regions that the county is divided into. And this is how the homeless service system organizes service delivery based on region within the county. And you can see here on the grid to the left that the regions within the county that are most impacted with their community members experiencing homelessness is our metro Los Angeles area at a little bit over 17,000 folks that are unsheltered. And then as well in our South LA with a little over 13,000 folks who are experiencing homelessness. Here we have just a quick gender breakout. The majority of folks that are gender-wise that are experiencing homelessness are 2/3 identify as male. And then we want to highlight that there's 1.3 of folks that are experiencing homelessness that identify as transgender. Additionally, we have a large population of transitional age youth and unaccompanied minors that are a part of our unsheltered community, and in 2020 saw an increase of 19% within this vulnerable subsect of the population. Seniors are also another special population that we have seen an increase in folks who are experiencing homelessness. And again, even though there has been an increase in seniors that are able to access shelter that are struggling with housing stability, there still was an overall increase for seniors age 62 and above. And I think it's important to also highlight that the predominant cause that folks report of the cause of their homelessness is due to economic hardship. We can see here kind of a breakdown also too of other causes that folks report, but just want to highlight that 59% of folks that are newly homeless reference this reason. Also too, looking at racial breakout, the majority of our homeless community that's experiencing housing instability is predominantly made up of folks who identify as Hispanic, Latino, or Black and African American. And this is absolutely due to the causes of structural racism that folks Black people are 4 times more likely to experience homelessness than other racial demographics. LA's inadequate housing supply and systemic racism, income inequality are driving inflows to the homeless service system. And I think it's important to highlight that due to systemic racism leads to disproportionate numbers of Black people becoming homeless in LA County, whereas 8% of the overall population in LA County is Black. The number of folks that are Black within the homeless population is 34%. So this is something that has been directly addressed in an initiative that was that LAHSA, or the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, was a part of in the ad hoc committee on Black people experiencing homelessness, where there are a number of recommendations that were developed to specifically address the systemic racism in the experience of homelessness and housing access. And we have a new department within the organization focused directly on equity and helping steward those initiatives forward. And just to round us out, want to make sure that folks are aware of the coming homeless count for 2022. We encourage you to visit our website at theycountwillyou.org. You can log on to that page, enter your zip code or the city that you live in or are interested in volunteering in, see the locations that are in need of volunteer support, and sign up to help support the count.
Thank you so much, Allyson. Really appreciate that overview. Certainly, this information is essential for us to have. And again, as I mentioned, our 4 guests and panelists today, they have been working at the forefront around this moral and humanitarian crisis, for many, many years now. And today, we're going to use those numbers, to really delve into, this multiracial, multi-generational, multi-regional, and multifaceted crisis that we are dealing with, and knowing that it is one of the drivers of disparity as it relates to the pandemic of displacement. So it is a joy for me to just quickly introduce our panelists and guests today. I'll start with Eunisses Hernandez. She's the co-executive director and founder of La Defensa right here in Los Angeles. And she has played a very, very strategic role around the reimagination that yielded Measure J. And so much love and much respect to you, Eunisses, for just your ongoing visionary and liberatory leadership that you bring, to us. We also have Damien Goodman with us, my brother, who is, right here in South LA, leading the Crenshaw Rising Subway Coalition, and also leading the Downtown Crenshaw Rising Collaborative and movement. And he'll talk a little bit more about that as part of just the, the ongoing organizing and resistance around gentrification here in South Los Angeles. My brother and colleague, Pastor Q, Jean-Marie, is part of Clergy for Black Lives, like I am, as well as pastors the Church Without Walls in Skid Row, on the forefront every day around this moral and humanitarian crisis, around houselessness, displacement, and so glad that he's able to be with us today. And then my sister, Janet Kelly, who is the founder and executive director of Sanctuary of Hope, and just really appreciate her visionary work and her courageous work as it relates to the challenge around our transition age youth. And you heard Allyson mention, what's going on with our young people and especially our transition age youth. And I'm going to start with Janet, seeing that she's the one that introduced me to the term transition age youth. I did not learn that in seminary. I want to go public by saying Janet Kelly educated me around that particular crisis, and we've been working, on that ever since. Janet, welcome. In light of the fact that November is designated as Homeless Youth Awareness Month, yes. And many folk might not even know this, right? Mm-hmm. I would like you to start there, and just maybe, talk with us, about the state of homelessness, among, young people. And then you can also, talk about the programmatic focus that Sanctuary of Hope, is, working on for that this month. Now, before you go, if you've just joined us, let me ask you to look for the globe at the bottom of your screen and choose interpretation so that you can hear, in your preferred language, what will be shared and talked about. So if you would just do that, I would appreciate it. The other thing I'll quickly ask is, if you would just in the chat, put your name in there, the organization that you are part of, and even the community, city, or location that you're joining from. That gives us a sense with who we have that's going to be part of the conversation around that. So Janet, thanks for being here. And why don't you kick us off?
Well, thank you so much, Pastor Sauls, for having me, as well as CHC. It's a great pleasure to be among some disruptors and activists who are doing some work to dismantle disparities within our communities. I'm wearing green today because today is actually Go Green Day to commemorate Homeless Youth Awareness Month. I would say when we talk about disparities and we talk about poverty and we talk about homelessness, houselessness, or even crisis management in the lives of 4 young people, I mean, it's a population that's often overlooked. Allyson noted in her presentation that there was a 19% increase in youth homelessness, right? And so we know that currently we are in a state where our youth are in, and our youth and our communities in which our youth reside are in crisis. Last year, when the homeless numbers came out, it was very interesting because if you look very closely, you will see that those who are impacted the most, those young people who are impacted the most are BIPOC youth, but when you break it down even more, they're Black and Latino, right? And even if you look at young families who are experiencing homelessness, where there was a 26% increase. When you talk about BIPOC youth, you break it down a little bit more, you're pretty much talking about Black and Latino, right? So as a lot of us who are in kind of this work of helping youth to become stable, helping youth to be rehoused again, the more that we're doing, we're seeing far more young people falling into homelessness. And COVID has not been has not been our friend in that aspect, in a way where, one, when we think about economic recovery and you look at young populations, every time that there's a crisis and there's an economic recovery tends to be very, very slow for that population, very slow. They're the first hired, first fired, and many of those who during the COVID period, in the COVID period that we even are in now, even though it's being called recovery, are still experiencing the same challenges of becoming rapidly reemployed, being employed in jobs that are living wage, being employed in jobs that offer health benefits, all of those things that are needed as a form of stability. And even when we think about it in terms of housing affordability, I mean, I live in South LA. The work that I do is in the southern region of South LA and the South Bay. You know, many of our young people are becoming displaced, one, because they can't afford to even live in an area that was once considered affordable, where corporate landlords have bought up a lot of the property. New developments have come in that have increased the property value, even as home sale prices are going up. I mean, many of our young people just may not even have that ability to even become homeowners. When I was 26 years old, I became a homeowner, right? And so, I mean, all of those things are grave challenges, but what's most daunting and troubling is that there are a lot of, you talked about the invisible hand, right? But we need to talk about the visible hand that we know. Like, for example, when we talk about young people being displaced in the foster care system, which when we talk about those young people being displaced, we're pretty much talking about Black kids that end up getting displaced in Lancaster, who oftentimes get stuck and can never come back and reconnect with their home communities in South LA or East LA, where they have a home base, where they have a social network, which oftentimes leave them in a space of instability, because once they age out, or God forbid, they leave or run away from placement, they're running away to a community that's not home. They're running away to a community or in their space that sometimes are very adverse, or what I say, there's a term that we use when we talk about youth, which you know, sometimes there's a big disconnect even in our homeless system, which is a visible hand that's very anti-Black, that puts our kids in jeopardy to the point where they will either lose their life or be a victim of gun violence or some form of violence. So although, you know, this is a month that we're raising awareness, we also need to make sure that we're remaining conscious. We're remaining conscious of the things that are happening right now that are drivers of disparity. Just as I mentioned, DCFS, there was a blind removal, a big push around blind removal. But at this present time, there's resistance that's happening around moving forward with that policy. And we know that child welfare systems disproportionately affect Black families, they disproportionately affect Latino families to the point that they are often the main drivers of housing instability and crisis among families, right? And especially when we need to put the term support back into supporting our families and what we consider cultural institutions of family as well. And so I'm going to say this though, and all that is happening, I'm very hopeful, right? Because I'm hopeful at all the things that are coming ahead that's going to house more young people. I'm very hopeful around the activism. So when you talk about Eunisses, Damien, Pastor Q, even you, Pastor Sauls, all of the activism that's going to be necessary to remain conscious about these things that are impacting our young people and impacting youth homelessness. I mean, you got to be, especially when we talk about juvenile justice, and that's an area that we're focusing on for this month for Homeless Youth Awareness Month. It's a population that's often not talked about or thought of. You know, people don't think about, yeah, when I vote for an ordinance that says people got to move along and you can't be right here because you're holding drugs. Well, you know what? When you're without a home and you're young, your safe place is anywhere you can stand and someone can visibly see you. So if you end up calling the police or the police come out and then they cite this young person for a citation of loitering simply because they need a safe place to be, which eventually turns into a warrant, which eventually may result in them spending jail time, which eventually causes them to have a record, which eventually creates a barrier for them to receive or get employment. We need to constantly think about those things. And it's not even that, it's, okay, I'm in a safe place, you tell me to move along, and I gotta walk 3 blocks, and I'm walking sure that young people have a place to call home.
Thank you, Janet. That I mean, you kicked us off, and then we're gonna go ahead and go deeper and go higher. But you touched on the whole challenge of carcerality, right? We live in a society that is addicted to carcerality, and that's a very, very strategic, structural, strategy that continues to contribute to this pandemic of displacement, around there. I want to go to Pastor Q. Pastor Q, just want to pull you in just for some thoughts, initial thoughts, as you are on the forefront right there in Skid Row. How are you experiencing, this humanitarian and moral crisis, of houselessness, homelessness, and how would you describe the drivers, of this pandemic of displacement, from where you sit, from where you march, from where you resist, and from where you reimagine? Pastor Q?
Yeah, well, it kind of reminds me of and actually a psychiatrist who said that when it comes to trauma in our communities in Palestine, she's describing her community in Palestine. She said an American soldier can come here, they can fight, they can drop bombs, and then they go home and experience post-traumatic stress syndrome. But we don't have that privilege, right? She goes, for the Palestinian kid, it's ongoing. And so being in Skid Row for 15 years, working with houseless situations, the trauma is ongoing. We know, as had been indicated, that the #1 driver for houselessness is housing unaffordability, rising, right? And then secondly, housing unavailability. And thirdly, poverty, just in case you missed the first 2. Right? We know we've had to change language from homelessness to houselessness, right? We know the Skid Row community kind of coined that. We started saying houselessness because people have community where they are. They've just been pushed out of their homes, right? And to say that they're homeless means that they don't belong in that community. No, they belong in that community. They've been in that community. Someone kicked them out of their home. right? So we know another major driver is decades of disempowerment as his example in the houseless capital of America, here in Skid Row, where we attempted to have our own neighborhood council to deal with our issues because we know how to deal with our issues. And the business community and actually fought against us and actually did some illegal stuff. And that's why that whole neighborhood council thing is still in litigation right now. And rest in peace and in power to General Jeff, who was leading that movement. Now we are going to have to continue. We were in that work and we're going to have to continue to do that work. And then decades of, not just decades of disempowerment, but decades of disinvestment and continued investment in policing as a solution to houselessness, right? Using policing and carceral housing and other law enforcement tactics in an attempt to address houselessness. The evidence shows that we want people out of sight and out of mind instead of getting dealing with the actual issues that folks are facing, right? So if we get folks out of sight with 4118, that new ordinance, right, we can definitely ignore them. And what we're saying is our folks will not be ignored any longer. It was Skid Row who coined, because 70% of the people, almost 70% of the people who are in Skid Row, it depends on who you ask, are Black. It was Skid Row who coined the term when we said the phrase, when we say that houselessness is a racial justice issue. We had been pushing that. And I know I'm about to step on some toes, but even the mayor said that we would be to the Skid Row community, that we focus on race too much. And then later on had to come back and say, oh yes, it's a racial justice issue, right? And so we know that. And we've been knowing that. So when you think about the major drivers, those are the major drivers. If you can't even allow the Skid Row, 50 square blocks of Skid Row to have its own community neighborhood council, that means you don't see those people as people. You see those people as a project. And Skid Row will not be a project. We will continue to be a community that is vibrant. There's so many positive things that are happening in Skid Row, but let the media tell you, they'll tell you something else. But as we celebrate General Jeff, a lot of those things came to light in some of those stories that were written. So I just want to leave it there so other folks can have the opportunity to share.
Great, great, great. As always, Pastor Q, really appreciate the perspective and just, again, connecting it, for us in making us realize that at the center of this pandemic of displacement, is the issue of who gets to decide, who belong, and as a result of that, who then gets otherized, right? In this whole piece, who gets to remain visible and therefore vocal, and who moves, into invisibility and therefore, become invalid, will around that. So we'll hit on that some more. Let's continue pressing on. I want to bring in Damien. Damien, if you can just give us just a sense again around, you and I know, and most of us here know that the pandemic of displacement is not new in the United States nor in Los Angeles, right? And I know that you have been, on this the whole piece of bringing illumination, to gentrification, as an ongoing structural tool, an ongoing economic tool that play into being a driver of disparity. Can you give us a sense, as we see what's happening, in South Los Angeles, around the gentrification piece, and you can also connect with that what's happening with the fight over the mall in terms of, community, collective, or communal ownership. and just so many structural barriers even around that piece, when community want to display their ability to facilitate economic viability, sometimes even that gets, crushed in so many ways. So Damien, your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Reverend Sauls, for assembling this amazing collection of practitioners and activists on the ground, or I should say, beginning by giving honor to the late great Lark Galloway Gilliam. Her spirit continues with us in this amazing form and its new leadership with CHC, continuing to bring these important conversations to the people. I want to be brief because I definitely want to allow time for the other speakers and to hear from those who have joined us today. But I first begin, and I know this audience knows it, but I just want to say it again, everywhere I am, gentrification and displacement are the same thing. They are not different. There's a difference between a community coming together, pooling its resources and building in its own light, economic revitalization, and that which is taking land that has been historically depressed and pushing the existing occupants out to bring in a more affluent mass of people, which is gentrification. And it is as American as apple pie. We sit here as people stolen from our native land and brought to this stolen land. You mentioned, Reverend Sauls, the Trail of Tears. We can talk about the burning of Black Wall Streets. We can talk about the burning of crosses on Black farmers' land. We can talk about the border being moved, right? We have in our American DNA displacement and harm being inflicted upon the marginalized, right? And so I like to use words because some people get confused about gentrification. I like to use more descriptive words. Let's get to talking about urban cleansing. Let's get to talking about cultural erasure. Let's talk about, like Pastor Q said, banishment, right? That is what we're seeing take place right now. And it is for those who that are being harmed, low income, especially Black, Indigenous people of color. We have to see this not as a symptom, but as a core and defining feature of racialized capitalism. Racialized, violent American capitalism. And in this system, there is a profit that must be made through the exploitation, derogation, the taking of labor, the taking of opportunity, the denial of humanity for people to have basic core necessities like shelter. I mean, you see it vividly on our streets, but just talk about healthcare, right? Healthcare being for profit, having people make decisions as to whether they're going to saddle their heirs with unimaginable debt or have to invest money in living. I mean, what society, what country that has as much wealth as ours will ever be seen in the book of history as being anything but morally bankrupt for having these conversations about healthcare and housing and basic dignity be questions at all. And so in this political system, in this one of the key elements upon which wealth is created is through housing and through property. Well, we were property once, weren't we? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that, right? We were once property. And so what we have allowed and why we are seeing this crisis take off, not just here in Los Angeles, although yes, it is the dark stain which should embarrass every elected official that occupies every seat in government. Los Angeles is a dark stain, but it is a product of increased rents. It is a product of increased housing costs. And that increased rents and that housing costs is primarily to enrich, stick with me now, a global investor class. They call it the FIRE sector, the finance, insurance, and real estate sector. And they control over $250 trillion of assets is what real estate amounts to across the globe. This is the basis upon which wealth is created. And so when they deny people shelter, when they deny people homes in the communities that they've held down, when they rip the fabric of the social network that we all rely upon, especially as marginalized people, they're They're increasing that stress. They're increasing the instability. They are doing what they have always done. And so I hate to tell you this because I don't want to be pessimistic about this, but we have some work to do. We have a lot of work to do. I am all for more money being put into housing for those that are low income, extremely low income, deeply affordable housing. But that's not going to be enough. It's not even close to being enough because we are basically, at best, we are turning on the air conditioner with the doors and the windows wide open. You know, you see, and I don't care if it makes people uncomfortable, you see at the same time this governor fought off recall, that he has making an initiative to put more money into affordable housing. He opens the floodgates to speculators. He removes tenant protections, refused to continue them. He moves these rezoning bills, which is this modern 21st century urban renewal project in SB 9 and SB 10. During the election, he wouldn't even say where he stood on it. The second that he survived recall, he did these things. He caused more harm. And Pastor Q mentioned 4118. Major champions within the city council of seeing HHH pass and additional resources to go into additional resources. But then they pass an effort that criminalizes people who are poor simply being on the street. Help me understand this. Make this make sense. What makes sense is that they are all agents and practitioners in this parasitic, violent, white supremacist, capitalistic system where wealth must be created through exploitation of those who are at the bottom of this caste system. And it is felt through housing insecurity. It is felt through houselessness. It is felt in so many other ways. Well, and because you mentioned downtown Crenshaw, what we have seen, especially among those who come from the great tradition of Crenshaw Subway Coalition, Fix Expo, which so many things that we did in partnership with CHC and the leaders who are here with us today, we wanted to heed to the words of the great Malcolm X, believing that land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. We are seeking to free the land to liberate a community. And so when the Crenshaw Mall, which is distinguished as what is to be the largest redevelopment project in the entirety of the city of Los Angeles, was to be sold to gentrifiers who have a violent history of harming people, merchants, residents, and communities, we said we're going to come together and seek to buy that mall for ourselves. We pushed off one, we pushed off another. And along the way, we built an amazing coalition of members and community groups and philanthropists and social impact investors who see this system for what it is and thought that a Black community should be in collective control of its major economic asset. It should drive its future. Early on in the process, people would say, because I was one of the leaders of the project, what are you going to do to the mall? What's your plan? And we would say, whoa. No, the question is, what's your plan? What do you want to see? And so getting people to focus back in at its core in believing that the resources exist, the public resources, even the patient capital and the philanthropy exists for people to be stable in their community, to see developments built in their light, with their vision, was powerful, so powerful. These crooks at Deutsche Bank had to deny it. Even though we offered more money at the bank of criminals across the globe said, nah, you can't do it. And I will say that, and I'll close on this. I was in a meeting with one of our beloved elected officials who's on the right side of many issues, including this one. And we were explaining the internal processes. You know, it got so bad, Reverend Sauls, that the white folk at Deutsche Bank who were deciding who to sell the mall to, using public pension dollars were the investments, right? They owned the mall and they were deciding who to sell it to. That's a key point, public pensions. We'll talk about that more. And I was explaining this interaction between the folk to the point that we had to actually literally send some of our white emissaries in to talk to them because they wouldn't talk to us. They wouldn't talk to the Black people leading the campaign. And we said, oh, it's this, it's that, you know, trying to rationalize it and explain their factors. And she said, no, they don't want you to succeed because it is going to lead to a movement through example that will be replicated across this country. They don't want this system torn down. And that's why we have to commit ourselves ever more to dismantling it.
All right, all right. As always, you made it plain, brother, and really, really appreciate that. That's just such a important movement because it touches on economics, and you brought out this whole phrase that I think a lot of people don't want to, touch on, which is racial capitalism. That really is the glacier in so many ways, right? That moves the tip of the iceberg in so many ways. Well, I wanna bring in Eunisses now, my sister. You have just been such a powerful force, in so many ways. The work that you're doing at La Defensa, but also teaming up with Isaac Bryant, who's now Assemblyman Isaac Bryant, right, in the state assembly, but just co-chairing just a movement of reimagination for the city and county, really the county of Los Angeles, around the Measure J work. So while analyzing racial disparity has its place, you and I know that organizing for system disruption, intervention, and reimagination, organizing for that is essential if we are to reach equity and vitality, right? Can you, just give us some insight, around, this storm and this movement that basically brought together, our work around Measure J, and maybe just, give us an update as to where we are with the implementation of it. Because it's not just, fighting and winning, right? We know when we fight, we win, right? But it's when we win, what's next, in terms of what's happening now, how it's facilitating the necessary systems change. Eunisses, take it away, my sister.
Thank you so much, Reverend Sauls, and thank you for inviting me to join these amazing panelists. I'm so honored to join you on Share Space. But Measure J, because I want to share a little bit about it, and I know we want to leave some time for Q&A, but Measure J was a ballot measure that was approved by LA County voters last year in November. Over 2.1 million LA County voters supported it. What it did is that it moved 10% of locally generated tax dollars. So when you pay your property taxes, when you buy something at the store, this goes into a fund. 10% of those dollars, which we have estimated to be about 900 million, would be moved into two buckets: community investment, such as young people, minority-owned businesses, and the second bucket is alternatives to incarceration, such as community-based pretrial services and mental health and substance use services in community. But before I give you more information, just to set the landscape, Measure J would not have been possible and only came about because of all that was happening last year with the loss of life of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, the millions of people marching in LA and across the country that really put at the forefront like the state violence that was taking away the lives of our Black, Brown, Indigenous loved ones. And so that really opened up opened up the space for us to push budget advocacy that we had been doing, because we hadn't been successful in moving dollars. We've been trying to move money out of the sheriffs, money out of other buckets, and it just was not, we just haven't been successful. But because of what was happening last year, Measure J was able to come to fruition. And sorry, I slowed down. I remember that there's the translation, so thank you for that. But what I'll add to that is that when we were writing Measure J, we pulled language around racial justice, around racial equity, around moving money out of the sheriff's department. And so when you read it, Measure J actually says no money can go to the sheriff's department or the probation department or judges. And this money needs to go to support Black, Brown, and minority-owned businesses. And so it opened the door for us to say, you know what, the systems that are out here, LA County, like they're racist, and they're taking the lives of our communities that are, it allowed us to tell the county, like, county, look at the jail system. 8% of women in LA County are Black, but over 30% of the women in LA County are Black. The disparities are incredible. And when you look at the number of people who have mental health needs in the jail, it's in Black, Brown, Indigenous people that have the highest rates, when we know that there's alternate services in communities. So Measure J opened up the door for us to put racial justice at the forefront and us demanding money. and in moving money out of the sheriffs, but it also opened the door for us to move money out of the county, because in past times when we've tried to move dollars, the county, when we stopped the jail plan in 2019, there were 2 contracts that were up, for a women's jail and a mental health jail, that were worth $3.5 billion. We pushed the county to cancel that, and they were able to move millions of dollars that were destined for jail construction into building out alternate infrastructure of alternatives to incarceration, which is really important to help us decarcerate. Measure J allowed us to open up the door to get money out of the county, because we hadn't been successful at the times, and the county has only done a thing where, yes, we canceled the contract, but we're going to move money into a new fund. But these funds are still going to go to county departments, which means that community wouldn't be able to access them. And so what Measure J did is that it opened the door for us to say, we're going to move at least 100 million into community, and community gets to decide where they want that money to go to. And it's not as intensive as what People's Budget LA has been doing around participatory budgeting, but that's the goal, for community to be able to say, this is where we want money to go to. And I'll give you an update on where we are so that I can tell you about the process of it. So when Measure J passed, a body was created, a Measure J advisory body was created for community to plug into. After a few months of meetings, there was a plan that was developed with an ask of $170 million. That community said, we want you to give us $170 million to fund the closure of Men's Central Jail. We want you to give us $10 million to fund pretrial services. And a lot of these services and a lot of the communities that were brought up as priority were Black communities, Black trans women were brought up as, communities that needed resources. And through this process of community being able to say, this is where we want the money to go to, it also opened the door up to say, and we don't want the money to go out the traditional county way, because that's how the county just keeps the money in its own accounts, right? Going in circles and circles. And this might not be the most exciting part, but it's important, because the way that the money now can go to community through Measure J is that we removed a lot of the barriers. So it's more accessible. It's not perfect, but it's a first step in us getting our dollars back into communities, especially the communities that have been most devastated by incarceration, gentrification. And, you all talk about how all of these things are intertwined. And in LA County, the first building that was ever built officially was a county jail. And it was during a time when, people were coming to the West Coast and incarcerating the indigenous people that were living here. So there's definitely waves of this happening. If y'all read the book City of Inmates by Dr. Kelly Lido Hernandez, it goes through these different stages of essentially like manifest destiny, like now, being rephrased like with different words such as gentrification and, racial cleansing, like this is very much real. And the carceral system, police and jails, probation, they're all used to continue to enforce gentrification, right? As we're seeing through 4118 and other things. But Measure J, last thing I'll say is about it is that through the whole campaign, even the implementation, the police, law enforcement, special interest groups have always been against it because they cannot access the money. It was one of our first efforts to try to really defund the police. And to that, I'll say that because of that, the law enforcement special interest groups sued the county on Measure J, and a judge a few months ago invalidated Measure J, meaning that as a law, Measure J doesn't exist. And I know this is confusing, but let me take a step back and say the county board of supervisors were still dedicated to moving this money. And so now Measure J inside the county is called Care First Community Investment. And so we're still moving money annually on this, but I feel like I've spoken a lot already, so I'm gonna pass it back to you, Reverend Sauls. Thank you so much. And if y'all want more info on Measure J, you can look it up on Reimagine LA on any of the platforms.
Thanks so much, Eunisses. You brought up that very important point, is yes, when we fight, we win, but it doesn't mean that, those who are committed to what Damien, called as this, a global investor class, or creating a city and or a county of inmates, referring to the book of Dr. Hernandez, folk are committed to that because it's working, to perpetuate, right? The whole ideology, and I should say the theology of, white supremacy. What we're dealing with, and if anybody thinks that, that is not the underlying driver here, then you certainly have allowed yourself to be numbed by, or your eyes to be closed, or as short as we say, bamboozled, you see, by a dream that continues to be a nightmare for BIPOC. And I think that's very, very important, for us to realize. And the key piece is that it is systemic, right? And the trifecta, to use a term that Pastor Smart, I always like to use, the trifecta around this is, it starts with lawmaking.
Yep.
Then it goes to law enforcement. And then from there, it goes to mass incarceration. That's the trifecta that drives this whole, the pandemic of displacement, right? That we are dealing with. We would want to invite those who've joined us. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, why don't you pop them in the chat so that we can make sure that we get your thoughts in here. We have about 20 minutes, left. So pop a question in there, and Arianda will monitor that, and we'll, we'll see how we can respond, to that. I want to give a quick shout out to our co-sponsors, that's working with us, in this ongoing work. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference of Southern California, the Cecil Murray Center for Civic Engagement at USC, the Muslim, Public Affairs, Council, the Jewish Center for Justice, of course, Sanctuary of Hope, Clergy for Black Lives, and of course, here at Community Health Councils, the Social, Change Institute that we've created to continue this work of bringing critical analysis as well as opportunities, to build agency and capacity for sacred resistance, in this particular work. So please put those questions in there. I want to pull, Janet back in. One of your words that you always use, Janet, and this was the framework that was used in coming up with these drivers of disparity, is this work of resiliency. And for you, of course, is youth resiliency. And to always, look for ways to see how we can, strengthen that resiliency, because we are overcomers, right? We are from people that wrote a song in the 1900s, right? During the failing First Reconstruction. And that song started with, lift every voice and sing. And then that first stanza goes into facing the rising sun, not the setting sun, facing the rising sun. That's just who we are. And for me, that line right there, captures the resiliency of in the midst, of this crisis. To us a little bit about, how is it that we can, continue to unlock that resiliency for ongoing resistance?
We have to continue to resist, and we have to continue to create strong systems and support networks for our young people. But also at the same time, we have to be able to create those opportunities where they are a part of, where they're a part of the economic growth and fabric of what happens within those communities, whether it be through land trusts, whether it be through co-ops, whether it be through the sharing of information or the transfer of information or the transfer of generational wealth. All those things play an important part as it relates to building or uplifting our young people's resiliency. And still, as I like to say, is remaining conscious of those systems that impact them economically, whether it's the juvenile justice system, whether it's the child welfare system, or even those who want to hold on and want to retain wealth and not share it by way of not providing economic or employment opportunities for our young people. So those are ways in which we can increase resiliency for our young people.
Absolutely. Damien, I want to pull you back in, because, I mean, economics in so many ways, is at the center of this. That's why Eunice's Measure J was critical, right? Because it was a systemic interruption that unlocked, financial resources to directly address some of these drivers of disparity. Folk don't want that, right? And that's why we see all of these, whether it's the recall of the district attorney, he's challenging, Measure J, et cetera, et cetera. So, or Pastor Q not wanting to bring voice, to our sisters and brothers in Skid Row by way of a neighborhood council, right? A basic neighborhood council, right? That is such an integral part of participation, in city government, given, just the foundation of, the economics around this, Damien, I mean, talk to us, a little bit more around how can we, continue to resist, right, these exploitive, right, economic systems that's in play and that everyone plays a part in. And I want to lift up, right, 2 laws was passed as SB 9, right, that the governor signed into law right after, he won the recall, and just the impact of that gentrification, especially around wealth building for BIPOC, but also the transfer of wealth. Your thoughts?
Well, I appreciate that. And at its core, what we're all talking about, I think, just to lift it up, is Kuji Chagalia, right? Self-determination, the ability to be in our own communities and to make them for ourselves, with us, collectively, for ourselves. I think that in so many ways, and this gives me an opportunity just to lift up, Eunisses, next time you see the Board of Supervisors, tell them they got some checks they're supposed to be running this way, right? Even the 170 million was a lot less than we thought we were voting for, and we all need to be on this front as these demands are made and these games are played by the bureaucrats. Now they need to run the checks this way down into South Central, into Black Los Angeles, into Brown Los Angeles. And so I think at its core, this gives me opportunity, Reverend Sauls, to lift up that key fact that dealt with the Crenshaw Mall, that shocked kind of everybody. I pay attention to this stuff. I live and breathe it. I'm up at 4 a.m. and don't go to sleep until midnight working on this. The entity that controlled and bought the largest economic asset in all of Black LA for a redevelopment plan that was going to be the largest redevelopment plan for all of the city of LA, it was bought with public money. It was they were public pension funds, Los Angeles County Employee Retirement Association, UC Board of Regents, Los Angeles Fire and Police Fund, all the way into Detroit, into New York, into New Jersey. These pension funds collectively are nearly $6 trillion that they control across the global economy. Well, just pension funds in America, nearly $6 trillion that they were using to buy real estate in our community and allow plans and just horrible people selling their assets to horrible people to exacerbate public crises, including doing direct harm to members of those pension funds. So I think in so many respects, at its core, and this is what we talk about, because this is an industry, when you talk about investment banking, that 98%, you heard me right, 98% of the people who control the direction of these investments are not Black and not women. So what do you expect? What do you expect them to do except serve the same white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative, parasitic capitalist enterprise that has made them, even though they're a global minority, has made them where they are today? And so I think what we have to be able to do is, yes, engage in and support initiatives and efforts like Measure J, but we need to just look at how our dollars right now are going and misappropriating, how public dollars are being misappropriated. How much money do they spend on Skid Row police versus the amount of money they spend on lifting up the unhoused, right? Let's talk about just simply reprogramming these priorities. And so, yes, we are absolutely going to do everything we can with the little that we have. We are pulling our money together. We are buying additional properties around the mall to put them into a community land trust. We are forming worker-owned cooperatives. We are looking at ways in which we can even buy single-family homes from grandma at market rate and turn them into affordable housing collectively. But we need to focus on what we are already paying for. I didn't even mention the word reparations, Reverend Sauls. Mm-hmm. I didn't even mention reconciliation, Reverend Sauls. Let's just talk about the money that exists right now and how it's being misspent, misappropriated, being used to cause harm instead of healing us. So that's part of this economic development conversation. And we just have to, I got to say this, we got to get some of these elected officials to understand these things. I mean, we had a challenge with one particular elected official on the Crenshaw Mall who said, well, I can't speak about it. It's a private transaction. Well, if we were on an auctioning block and being sold off, you'd have spoke about that, wouldn't you have? Here we have a directly racist system taking place where a Black collective comes together to take its asset and bring it under community control. And you can't find your voice. You're going to let it go to folk that want to do a Black community harm, not just the race, the people and the business operators that are immediately around the mall talking about displacing over 60,000 people, increasing housing insecurity to over 60,000 people. Mm-hmm. So folk need to realize that, yes, we are putting a lot of time and we must continue putting a lot of time into voter education and engagement and passing initiatives, into holding elected officials accountable. I know I'm at a 501c3, I got you. But we have to make sure that those that are in office are being held accountable and are using their power to disrupt this system. Not just tweeting, but like literally saying, I want to know how that $60 billion of investment at Lacera is going toward helping and not harming. I want to see reappropriation, a new investment strategy for LACERS, the Los Angeles City Employee Retirement System, so that it goes to healing and not harming. That's money that's already in the bank. That's stuff that we already have. I didn't even mention reparations, Reverend Sauls.
Right. And you're right about that. That's something that a lot of people want to run away from, but you can only run so long, and you can only hide for so long. At some point, we're gonna have to come to our senses structurally around that. I mean, we just spoke about the transfer of wealth, right? Everybody wants to talk about what shouldn't be paid back, but nobody wants to talk about the transfer of wealth that continue to take place as a result of the enslavement, you see, of, our ancestors, the displacement, of the First Nations, you see what I'm saying, et cetera, et cetera. All these things are connected and around that, which brings me to, Pastor Q. I mean, clearly there continues to be a disposition of one, accommodation, right? And one of assimilation, right? We come from, and this series is based on a disposition for liberation in terms of that. Everything that's going on, there is a spiritual, aspect to it. That's why I talk about the theology, of white supremacy, as well as the theology of racial capitalism, right? In terms of that. Eunice, as you mentioned, there's this whole crazy thing of manifest destination. There's just a bunch of theological malarkey as far as I'm concerned, Pastor Q, how do we, as part of our sacred resistance, elevate, if you will, participate in, bringing about, this liberation that is so needed?
Well, the Church Without Walls follow in the tradition of liberation theology and abolition theology, right? We believe a lot of these systems need to be abolished. We smoking them like we smoking crack, right? So it's the only thing we know, so we think it's the only thing that go. If we go to the text, right, for those of us who are in the biblical tradition, those of us who believe in the story of Adam and Eve. God did not put humanity in a ghetto when he created them. He put them in a garden. You can't force people into garbage situation and expect pristine outcomes. Get the frick out of here with that, right? For years, decades, centuries, we've been in the ghetto, and what we've allowed America to do is normalize ghetto situations and left Black, brown, and indigenous people with the bag and the purse saying, well, you ain't got enough money in it, right? I'm sorry, I feel like preaching right now. So I'm just saying,
Preach
right,
on, brother.
if God did not put humanity, if God put humanity in a garden where we like to take walks with our significant others and smell the flower and, flowers and, all of that stuff and talk about, boo, I love you and all of that, you know, God didn't put people in a ghetto situation. He put them in a garden. And think about what happens in a garden: life, vitality. Now the chickens are coming home to roost. Our entire city is now a ghetto because we were comfortable with ghettos across the country, displacing millions, hundreds of thousands in the Second Great Migration, flowing into South Central, in turn the Japanese, then those folks who were fleeing the KKK in the Second Great Migration down into Little Tokyo. It was called Black Wall Street West, Bronzeville, for 4 years after the Japanese were interned unjustly, sent into internment camps unjustly. And when the Japanese came back, the landlord said, oh, the model minorities are back, so you Negroes got to get out. Skid Row you started to see the trickles of Skid Row even back then, because Black folks were left were kicked out in the second Great Migration from Master's House without a pot to pee in. And in the 1940s, we had a housing crisis during World War II. It was never dealt with, and we're still reaping the fruits of it today. So those folks who come with modern day solutions as if the origins of these issues are modern, they're not modern, they're pre-modern. They've been here forever. So unless we want to go back, I want to quote this and I'm done. It was in the Kerner Commission where 120 social scientists said that they labeled the Kerner Commission, the first draft, the America of racism. Lyndon Johnson threw it against the wall because he was angry because it was threatening his great society, his plan for his great society. And then they said, America, in 1967, the Kerner Commission, 68, the Kerner Commission said, America is moving on a path to two America, a white one and a Black one. Were they prophets? Seems so to me.
Lord have mercy. We're running a little behind, so I want to ask our folk if you can stay maybe for about 5 minutes over, because I do want to get in, Eunices into this, because, I'm when we talk in preparation for this, I mean, we just talked about the sense of, exhaustion, that comes with not just resistance, right, but with implementation of that which we've won. And then, of course, we had that lawsuit that took place to try and undermine or undercut, around Measure J. Talk to us a little bit, around, what else can we do as part of our ongoing resistance, Eunices, around the structural disruptions that we need to make sure continue to happen, as part of our work of moving, South Central, initially, but then the entire city and county of Los Angeles, into a thriving community, right? We call it a city of angels. I'm convinced now that given how we've been structured in the city and county, there are people that are being treated as less than angels, right? They are now lesser angels. You see what I'm saying? And we have to come to terms with that, given the humanity that gets violated by all of these structures. Pastor Q talked about, God putting people into a garden. That's really what our folk in what our folk in South Los Angeles are asking for. We want a thriving and flourishing community. That sounds like God to me in a different way, instead of, dealing with, the ongoing structures that create pain, right? Disenfranchisement, displacement, et cetera, et cetera. How do we, keep our hands to the plow as we move forward with this, Eunisses?
Thank you, Reverend Sauls, for that question. And shoot, that's a heavy question. I feel like that everybody on the team should answer it, because we're intergenerational in this space, right? And so the work that we're doing now builds off the work that people on this line have been doing for decades. And so there's a few things that come up for me, and one is recognizing that we're intergenerational. Pastor Q talked about, the history and the things that were happening before us, and it's essentially repeating, because the system is always going to try to keep its power. It's always going to try to keep its money. And so to always transform to fit the landscape that we're in. And so by recognizing that there's been a lot of labor done beforehand, what people have done beforehand, and what compromises have been made in the past, so that we don't make compromises in the future. And I think that's really important that we uplift that abolition is what we want to see in the future. It's not a lack thereof, but it's what we want to see in the future. And also pushing not to compromise and not leave people behind, because that's what's happened. People have been intentionally left behind in this movement of, development. Then the next thing I'll say, and I don't have all the answers, but this is what I'm trying to incorporate in myself and in the work that we're doing, so that we can be stronger, is like taking care of our physical being, right? Is another thing. Just try to figure out how we don't fall into the capitalistic infrastructure of overworking ourselves and overworking the colleagues that we work with, because the third piece of this, it's a journey. It's going to take us a long time. It's taken us a long time to get here in a place where we still have, some of these crises are even worse than they have been before, but in a lot of different places, we're also in a much better place than we were. So I think it's also recognizing and having patience with ourselves that this is going to be a long haul. It's not just, the next election or the next, administration. It's like just this train that we got to keep moving, or like a rock that we're trying to chip away slowly but surely. And those are the things that come up for me, because and implementation is just so hard. Like I said before, the system tries to keep its power and its responsibilities, but we just got to recognize that it's a long journey. Those are the things that come up. Thank you.
Well, Reverend William Barber talks about that we are in the third reconstruction. And he says the reason for that is because people resisted the first one and the second one. And guess what? They are resisting the third one. That's why we see this movement that's so anti-democratic, right? And so pro mass incarceration, mass detention that's going on, around this country, and I might say, around the world. Let me invite, all of our other, partners and panelists. Any thoughts around, just final thoughts, as we, bring this to a close here in a few, that you have, in terms of, how do we continue to engage in sacred resistance? I want to lift up Rowena Rucker's note about, appreciation for all of you for speaking truth about what is really going on, and that there are woke people out there. So James Carville, take note. We are unapologetically woke, in terms of that, and we don't need, your permission, to be woke. And if wokeness is an addiction, it's an addiction for us that will result in our liberation. Hello, somebody. So she just wanted to share some appreciation, around that. But just some final thoughts around how do we persist, in our resistance and our reimagination, as it relates to this pandemic of displacement. Just some final words. I'll start with Damien, and then Janet, and then Pastor Q.
I mean, I just want to, thank you for bringing this all together and bringing us back. I think in so many respects, we've been able to continue doing the work here in the Crenshaw community. Yes, with the continued Downtown Crenshaw Rising Project. Yes, the mall will be brought into our hands. We're going to move the current guy who's in current occupation of our land off of it, and buy our mall and build it for us by us. Along the way, we are also engaged in taking additional properties that are around the community off the speculative real estate market, so they are not continued opportunities for global investor classes to continue the harm and actually become places of healing, places that are collectively owned, places that are affordable. You know, Janet said she was 26 when she bought a home around here. I mean, and I gotta lift this up because everybody pretends like there's this mythical Black young professional class that just needs to be taught that Leimert Park and Hyde Park exist. We can't afford them either. There is no mass of just Black people throughout America who make $250,000 that have enough money to buy a house in Leimert Park. So how do we deal with this? How do we hold onto the space that we have held down, like Pastor Q mentioned, during times of divestment, where the only investment was policing, gang injunctions, doing what they did to make gentrifiers feel comfortable so they wouldn't have to see Alejandro and Dante on the street corner, and criminalizing those who are in other difficult situations by just a direct response to systemic racism and oppression, right? And so we're going to continue to build. We're going to continue looking for opportunities. We're going to continue finding ways in which people who are here can make clear that they shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. And I want to encourage everyone, you know, while we're doing things at a pretty intense level, and we have large actions, some of these revolutionary actions can be just as simple as talking to your neighbors. We lifted up the LASA numbers, right? Next time you see somebody complaining about a tent, just talk to them and appeal to their humanity. Remind them that those are their neighbors who once were able to afford a home. Next time you see people who are thinking about selling the home for whatever reason, there's some good reasons, some bad reasons why people, tell them to talk to their neighbors first, talk to their family first, and see if they can keep that property under our control and not allow the speculation, and some of these realtors are problematic, true. I don't care what color they are. Talk to how we can engage in that whole community, get back to that connectiveness, that interconnectedness, because at its core, this system is about individualism. At its core, it's about exploitation. It's about taking advantage of some to enrich a few. We don't believe in that. We don't believe in that as majority global people, as people of the global majority. We believe in community. We believe in the village. And so I think we got to get back to that along the way. When we have our village elders and our village representatives and they get put in office, they need to be reminded of that.
Yeah.
We need to be finding ways that we are using our systems, our efforts to lift up and bring about the type of changes like Measure J.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just any type of community, right? Beloved community.
Beloved community. King's beloved community.
Janet, some final thought?
Just to piggyback on and uplifting the village and the community, we know that the village response is the solution to addressing housing insecurity. And I would just leave it at that.
All right. Pastor Q, some final thoughts from you, sir.
Yes, so we know whatever the devil means for bad, God uses for good. They pushed us all into Skid Row and downtown communities, and now they want it back. But what we're doing to fight back now is we elevating people like Biddy Mason, and we're elevating all of the Black pioneers that have come through downtown Los Angeles. And we're saying, no, you're not going to erase us from the city. We're not just in one block of the city. We're not just in South Central. We're not just in Compton. We all over this place. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. And so what we're going to be doing in Skid Row is, even with the hip hop smoothie shop and the co-op things we're working on, and we even have an event coming up in November on the 20th. We're honoring Biddy Mason and General Jeff, who just passed away, honoring the Black pioneers of downtown Los Angeles. We need to educate our people. And I could go on, but I just want to pass it on because of the time.
Eunice's final words?
Thank you. Just final words. You know, my parents are Mexican immigrants, and I just want to say that we have to stand my community more in solidarity in supporting the Black community, especially on y'all's efforts in South LA. Gentrification's hitting my neighborhood. A house just next to mine sold over $50,000. And so over the asking price, which put it over $1 million. And so I just also this is a message to the folks that are watching that are Latinos to stand in solidarity, that, you know, as united we are, the stronger that we are, because this system of capitalism and individualism, you know, that Damien, you brought up, like, that is real. There are brown folks that are trying to buy these houses and to sell them to other folks that are, you know, these Goldman Sachs people. And it's just, we're all going to end up, they're all going to come after us anyways. And so I would just make that appeal to my community that, you know, to step up and to recognize the anti-Blackness that happens, that fuels, you know, the displacement, that fuels gentrification. And we just, we have a responsibility to stand, you know, to stand and support you all.
Absolutely. Pastor Q, Jean-Marie, Damien Goodman, Janet Kelly, Eunisses Hernandez, thank you so much for coming and just continuing to, you know, contribute to these streams of sacred resistance and moral reimagination into, you know, a waterfall that will move us to what we at Community Health Councils state in our mission, you know, that will move us, you know, to collectively build equitable systems. That's what it's about for us. And as we at Community Health Councils stand on the eve of our 30th anniversary, we know we stand on the bold, broad, and beautiful shoulders of La Gilliam, you know, to keep on fighting, you know, for, you know, racial justice and equity, you know, and in doing so, we want to hold together unity and solidarity in this work that we are called to do, right? Unity and solidarity, fighting, you know, anti-Blackness as well as anti-oppression, you know, in terms of the work that we've been called to do. So thank you so much. I want to thank everyone, you know, for joining us. And I want to thank my partner in developing this series, Ariandra, for her support, and all of us, all of my team members at CHC, our co-sponsors who will, you know, at some point come together so that we can begin to talk about developing this, you know, curriculum I talked about, you know, at the beginning. I want to close by lifting up a word that Janet, you know, used. Janet said, despite everything that's going on, I remain hopeful. Hope is probably, you know, a disposition that that I have embraced, you know, since I was growing up, you know, in, you know, apartheid South Africa, and there I was taught by hope, you know, by one of our elders who is still with us, Bishop Stanley Muhoba. You know, he wrote in a book called Tears of Hope that hope is like a bird singing about dawn while it's yet still dark. Mm. Today, we have heard the voices of 4 birds and many birds that's been part of this experience, continuing to sing, you know, songs, you know, about dawn while it's yet still dark. And the reason for that is because we are facing the rising sun. So thank you so much for joining us today for the second installment of our Soulforce Alliance, you know, webinar series